on this computer. You notice he just coughed into his
That's right.
whatever that is, your elbow.
They call it the inside of the elbow.
The inside of the elbow. And that's David Treadway, who I've known for about 10 years now. And he has been an actor for Theater of the Word Incorporated, my company that evangelizes through drama. And we have lots of stories where we've toured the country together with other actors doing these shows in parishes and schools and so forth. And he also did murder mystery dinner theater shows for me for a long time. And he's very funny. He's a very good actor and he's very creative. And then he's also alive. And the reason we know he's alive is because we were praying for him because he got COVID-19. Right. I know of 3 people who got it. One was on a ventilator and recovered. Really? Then there's Dave. Yeah. Dave was never hospitalized. No. Thank God. And then there's a priest we know who died. You remember Father Edwards, Dave? We may have met him once. He used to be at St. Elizabeth of Hungary, but at any rate, he was.
I may have met him once, but it had been a while. Yeah,
he had some underlying conditions, and he was at the retired priest's home here in St. Louis. So I think.
Well, Monsignor Cronin was saying I think that there were like 7 priests that had passed.
Whoa, I didn't know that they'd passed. I heard that it had done quite a job on the Regina Clary home, but
it did. That's correct. Yeah,
we'll have to keep them in our prayers. So, of the 3 people I know. David's one of them who had COVID and David did fine, but Dave lives with his mom and dad. He was very worried about them because they're older. And so at any rate, Dave, tell us a bit about how you got it. I know you've been working at a bank for your day job and you guys are considered essential, but by the way, the reason I really wanted to talk to you is our trainer, Rob, who helps Karen stay in shape and we work out with him. I told him about you and he said, I'd really like to hear that guy interviewed because he's tired of hearing interviews with nothing but celebrities or people who
I'm certainly not a celebrity. See, work that out.
You are in my mind.
Oh,
People who may or may not know really what they're talking about, but he's just curious to know what's it like to get this, to survive it. But tell me. So go ahead and start talking. Tell us how you got it and what happened.
Well, so I worked for a financial institution. We were considered essential. We switched to a drive-through only format for all the transactions that we were doing because the executive team felt it was safer not only for the employees, but also for the customers. But then to the best of our knowledge, one of our staff members was exposed at some point, and then basically, we worked with that individual for a week before they were aware themselves that they might have it. They began to show signs and did the right thing. At that point, they called off work. They didn't come back in. But unfortunately, by that time, because their exposure, they had already been contagious, we didn't realize it. And so I worked with that individual the Saturday before the Tuesday that I started showing symptoms, and fairly certain that that's who I got it from. And we had been advised to not only wear masks, but also gloves, et cetera, while working. At the time, it was optional to wear masks, and the gloves still are optional. However, we're all taking that a little bit more seriously now. But so we would wear masks on and off depending upon our sort of just proximity to one another. But particularly on Saturdays, because things are quite busy, sometimes you get into a rush and you just forget to put the thing back on or whatever. So me and this other individual were interacting quite a bit. And it's funny, it sticks in my mind because I read an article early on during the COVID-19 pandemic talking about how they were able to backtrace the first case that appeared in Germany. And they think that it actually happened between a person passing a salt shaker to another person. And in my mind, I recalled the day that I worked with this individual at the bank, and they and myself had been transferring money back and forth for various transactions. And to me, that's most likely where I ended up with it. That, or the fact that because we were wearing masks on and off that day, there's a good possibility that we were breathing too close to one another, and it was that easy.
Wow. And
Yeah.
then there was a third person in addition to the two of you at the bank who got it?
That's correct. So out of a staff of 8, 3 people ended up with it, which is, if
Oh
you
my
think about
gosh.
that as a percentage, that's pretty high.
Yeah, that is quite high.
Yeah, it is.
And I had
So
read the other day that hundreds of people have it in a chicken plant somewhere. I don't remember where, but apparently in places where people work closely together, there's quite a bit of transmission.
I'd
Um,
heard something about that, I think in Iowa, maybe.
yeah, it might have been. So,
Yeah.
how are the other two at the bank? Have they recovered?
So this is one of the interesting things about experiencing this virus is that it hits different people drastically differently. So for instance, one of my coworkers who ended up testing positive for it, they basically experienced some fatigue, a slight cough. I think they may have run a temperature for a day, but not even a bad temperature. And then after about 3 or 4 days, they kind of just felt pooped out. That's basically what it
Mm.
was for them. For me, it was multiple days with a temperature. It was a pretty severe cough at points. At points, it was pretty severe difficulty breathing, and some chills and things like that. And then for the other individual who tested positive at the branch, that person ended up with a pretty severe cough, which lingered long enough that they actually waited to come back to work until after the rest of us were there, because they were concerned that they might still be contagious at that point. But all three of them had a different experience with it. And I think actually, as far as severity of symptoms, I think that mine were probably actually the worst. My case is probably somewhere in the moderate range. One of the other individuals I definitely would say was a mild case. And then I think the other one was somewhere in between myself and the other person. So, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, but
Um,
there were definitely, I think one of the things that's most difficult with it, because it's unpredictable, there's almost a certain capriciousness to it. And what ends up happening is you just kind of have this thought in the back of your mind, am I going to wake up today, feel so, and then in a few hours, am I going to just be suffocating to death? From a mental standpoint, that becomes really taxing.
hmm. Oh, I can imagine.
Yeah,
Um, So, and I know you went at first, they wouldn't test you, and they told you that unless your condition deteriorated, they would not test you. But
correct.
then it did a bit, and you actually went and they tested you, and you tested positive.
Well,
Um,
what was interesting was I actually called one of the testing centers when I first suspected that I had it. And I described my symptoms to them, and then they told me exactly what you just said, not severe enough.
mm,
Then about a week later, things got quite a bit worse, but I actually called my own physician's office, and then my physician's office referred me to a respiratory therapist, an actual urgent care that had been converted into a COVID respiratory clinic.
mm.
And then they said, it's been this long. These are the things you're experiencing. Get out of there, go. I called and then had an appointment 3 hours later. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, it was really fast. And then
And then
that
your
was great.
test results were within about 24 hours, right? Or
48. Yeah.
48.
So I
Yeah.
got tested on a Wednesday, and then, well, maybe about a day and a half. I got tested on a Wednesday, and I got notified on Friday morning. Right?
I
Yeah,
think
I
that's
think
right.
that's right.
That seems
Yeah,
about right. So, and now you're living with your parents. How did you
correct.
manage to isolate yourself? How did you see all these details?
I know, right? It's
How did you
true.
eat? How did
Right?
they do your dishes? How did they get food to you? Do you have a bathroom in your bedroom? What did you do for all that?
So those considerations were something I have my mind in general works kind of on an analytical efficiency basis. It's one of the things that actually makes me a pretty good editor from a video standpoint, is because I'm always thinking about compressing procedure in order to be able to get to the meat of what you need to be able to do. And so that part of my mind kicked in, and I was like, how do I make it so that there is a real process for how we do this?
Hmm.
So essentially, one was, I was like, if I don't need to leave the room, I'm not going to leave the room. So I spent nearly 15 days in an 8 by 11 room,
Hmm.
and that in itself is enough to
Oh
kind of
my.
wear on you.
Oh,
But then there's only one bathroom in my mom and dad's house.
oh,
And so because of that, what it meant was that every time I did anything in the bathroom, I had to clean the bathroom.
oh my gosh.
So, and you can imagine, again, that becomes, so you start then to go, okay, how many, it gets to the point where you go, okay, how many wipes does it take to clean down when I do this and
Oh,
this and this?
yes.
And as far as the food goes, that was thing where they were gracious enough to prepare my meals and then basically set them outside of my door. I would get them, bring them in. When it was time to do dishes, they would do their dishes usually. And then my dishes would go in a separate sink of water with very hot water and dishes and things like that.
Mm,
And it was constant, just if I had for some reason to come out of the room, then it was constantly they step onto the other side of, the room, and I walk on this side of the room.
mm,
And then, along with just sort of wondering if this thing's going to try and kill you at some point every day, there's on top of that, my parents are both, because of their age, they're both considered automatically high risk. And
mhm,
so because of that, every single day, not only was I thinking about my own health, but the thing that really wore on me was like, how do I keep them from
mm.
getting this?
Of
Because I
course.
have no idea what their reaction to it's going to be, the
Right.
response.
Right.
So yeah, it was very trying mentally in particular.
And they still have no symptoms. And it's been how long since you've been considered non-contagious?
So I am non-contagious as of a week and 2 days ago.
Mm,
So they will. So what ended up happening, of course, is the entire time I was sick, they had to be quarantined as well, right?
mm-hmm.
So there was that. But then from the last day I'm considered contagious, for 2 weeks after that, they have to be quarantined for not only their own benefit, but also for the benefit of the public. So their quarantine will end, as long as they don't show any symptoms, Wednesday of this coming week.
I see.
So they've actually even been quarantined longer in a sense than I have, because now they had to start an additional 2 weeks after I was considered non-contagious.
So being quarantined, how do they get groceries and things like that? Do people shop for them?
While I was sick, that's how we did it. My
Yeah.
sister, my aunts, and some other family friends would shop for us, which was great. Now that I've been cleared, I don't have to be quarantined anymore.
Uh-huh.
So because I'm considered non-contagious and because I've had it, there's a consideration for at least some immunity.
Mm-hmm.
So while they have to remain basically in the house, I can actually go and do the grocery shopping for us and things like that now. So I've been doing
Wow.
that. Yeah.
Gee. Well, I'll keep them in our prayers, Dave, as will
Thank you.
Karen. So hopefully you can get past midweek and they'll be fine,
Yeah,
because I know
I
that'll be
know.
a real burden
That'll be
off.
a weight
Yeah,
off of everybody. That's exactly right. Because it is
sure,
difficult. The longer it is you live with that thought, just almost like waiting to see if it's going to happen, it really eats at your mind. And honestly, a couple of days while I still had it, you, not only for yourself but also for the people that you're living with, your mind can start to get away from you a little bit. And yeah, as you and
sure.
I both know, people who
Right.
are quite creative,
Yeah,
our
right,
imaginations don't need any help.
right. That's right. It's very easy to imagine the worst, and
It
especially
absolutely is.
when you're isolated and you're locked down and you're
Hmm.
not around other people and you're not working or doing anything. And it's
Well,
what
yeah, you
else?
have a lot of
Yeah,
time on your hands.
you have a lot of time on your hands, and I can imagine.
Hmm.
So, did you discover a way of dealing with it, either spiritually or intellectually?
Hmm.
Were there any breakthroughs?
So the first thing was that the Holy Spirit gave me the grace to pray the Rosary every day, even
Mm,
though I was feeling pretty awful for the most part. The two things that I kind of had the grace to continue doing was praying the Rosary, and then also um, there was a priest in Australia, and I don't remember his name, but he had asked if anyone felt like they wanted to join him in praying the Divine Mercy Chaplet every day for people who were suffering from the pandemic. And I had started to do that before I got sick. And I felt like it was really important for me to try and continue to do those things while I was sick, because not only did it help provide at least some structure to a day that could just be utterly structureless. On top of that, it was also these reminders of all of these um, marvelous things that God has done, and that it separates, for me anyway, what it helped to do is it separated the fear of my own mortality from the real promise, which is it in a sense, it doesn't matter what happens to us in this life. You live faithful to the gospel and you live faithful to the church, and then you trust that after this, the mercy of God welcomes you into that eternal beatitude. And so it's that's what it did for me. And then, of course, the other completely secular thing is I signed up for a free trial of Netflix, and I watched a lot of that.
Um, What would you recommend?
I rewatched some Parks and Recreation. I don't know if you're familiar with that, which is a pretty funny show. I rewatched a good deal of The West Wing. I'm a huge fan of Aaron Sorkin's writing, and so I really enjoyed that. I watched a movie that was made here in St. Louis called The Ghost Who Walks. It was produced by a couple of people I know, and the guy who made it actually had some money, so he hired real actors and all that kind of stuff. And while the film has its moments, I wouldn't recommend it.
You did recommend to me Hot Fuzz.
Oh,
So,
you never responded to that text.
that's because it was not my favorite movie. But
You've seen it.
No, I watched it based on your recommendation because
Excellent.
I figure, hey, David, he knows movies, man. He's a movie fan. So
Okay,
we
yeah, I
watch
do.
Hot Fuzz. Well, maybe it's my boomer thing. I don't quite know what it is. Colin tells me that he and I watched Shaun of the Dead, which
Right,
is
same director and writer. That's right.
Yeah, part of that trilogy. I
Yeah.
don't remember that. Now, it was funny. I liked it,
Yes,
but
it was.
it had that 20 minutes at the end where it becomes this sort of violent video game orgy of death, which to me was just over the top. And
well, you
I
also
know
have to remember,
it's a parody
of
Yeah,
90s like buddy cop movies.
yeah.
That's right.
I know. And the dialogue was good. The characters
Yes.
were interesting. There was a lot of funny things in that movie, but I don't know.
But
I guess I'm,
maybe it's your thing.
what'd you say?
Maybe it just wasn't your thing.
Yeah, it just wasn't my thing.
We know about how the fact that your favorite movie and the last movie you ever saw in the theater was The Sting, right? So
That's not my favorite movie. It's the last movie I ever saw. I tell people that was 1973, and I did see The Sting. I did see The Sting in theaters. Here's one thing I don't mind is I don't like going to movies because you got to sit through 35 minutes of commercials
of
and
previews. That's right.
previews, and it's awful. Karen loves to go to movies, but we haven't been. So, last night we watched on Netflix, it's called The Pursuit. And it's a sort of an infomercial / documentary made by this guy, Arthur C. Brooks, who is writing a series of articles in The Atlantic on happiness. And he reminds me kind of Jordan Peterson. He's sort of, from a psychological point of view, examines what makes people happy and what makes people miserable. And how do you approach happiness? The movie was more about economics and capitalism, but it's interesting in that he goes to India and he talks to, he visits a neighborhood that was traditionally a slum, very poor, but that has advanced quite a bit in the last generation. He talks to some Appalachians, some folks in Eastern Kentucky who have suffered from the coal mines closing. So, he visits a lot of people. And then I found out that he mentions in the movie, I think, we mentioned somewhere, maybe it's not in the movie, but he mentions that he's a Catholic and that he became Catholic because of a religious experience at the Church of Our Lady of Guadalupe in Mexico. And then he wrote an article for America Magazine, which I have not finished reading, but apparently he had a kind of religious experience. But he's similar to Jordan Peterson in that he's not overtly religious. He approaches this from a more or less secular perspective, although he does so with the idea of how do we fully develop the dignity of the human being? How do we prevent capitalism, say, from merely exploiting workers and creating wage slaves? I would say he's much more of a distributist from the sound of things than a capitalist.
Sounds like it.
Anyway, that was interesting. You would like that. It's only about 70 minutes long and it's very well produced. You can see
it's called what now?
It's called The Pursuit. And they put some money into it, but it was much more about economics than happiness per se. But
this is, of course, a play on the phrase "the pursuit of happiness."
The pursuit of happiness, which he then talks about at the end. He talks about happiness a bit more at the end, but it is an interesting movie. So here we are, David, in a society where we can watch pretty much anything at any time.
Yeah.
And it's so different from what it used to be. I mean, I remember the days when the first VCRs came out and we were astonished that you could set the timer to record a show, and half the time it worked, half the time it didn't, and then you could watch something that you had missed.
I remember
but you could
that
never
too.
you could never just pull up at random things that you might want to see. So I mean, at least there's that. At least being isolated has that advantage. So let me ask you
True.
this, and
Yeah,
that would
that's right.
be, did you do anything else other than your prayers? Did you read? Did you meditate? Did you do any writing? Did you think about your life in general? Was there anything else? And if you did, was it helpful?
So yeah, I did a few other things. One of the things I did was a lot of just sort of contemplation. Um, Normally for me, that's, even though it can be productive, it's often just a way for me to avoid doing other things. But a lot of contemplation, just considering my own life, considering the trajectory of my life, where I've been and how that informs, where I'm going.
Right.
Um, so there was a lot of time for that. I did do some reading, a little bit of reading. Primarily, the reading I did was I tried to stick with reading the readings from the Missal every day.
Hmm.
But the other thing that I did do is I did do a little writing. I've been working on a screenplay now for, embarrassingly, a couple of years. And so I got back into doing that and realized that it was pretty terrible. And so I took a little time to start to refashion that a little bit and actually work out some of the story beats so that there were a little bit more, there's a little bit more thought put into them, because I had been, as sort of an exercise, I had been just writing off the cuff. I hadn't been doing much of any really thinking through lines and plot points and things like that. So I got back into doing that and had to have a genuine sort of like, wow, this is worse than I remember, and then go back at it and start to fix some things, which is great. I ended up getting some really good stuff out of that, of going, oh, but what if we did this? And, oh, you know what? Cut that whole scene and instead make it about the relationship between these guys, and et cetera, et cetera. So so I did some writing, and that was really good. The way in which these things were helpful, of course, is that it wasn't merely distraction. It was actually focused energy,
Yes.
because it was productive. It wasn't simply just, for me, the Netflix, for instance, most of that, particularly like, the 22-minute sitcom stuff, that's just to take my mind off of something, and so that I don't have to think too much. But
Right.
the other things, particularly the writing, that was something that really helped me to put my energy somewhere. The thing that is easy in a situation like that, not only because you don't feel well, but also because of the isolation, it's easy after a while to begin to start to feel sorry for yourself, or even to
Sure.
drop into despair.
Right.
And so doing these other things are almost like offering up little crosses that go, yes, I'm suffering, but I'm going to do this anyway as a sort of offering, and I'm going to unite it to the Lord's suffering and do it in a sense for him. And say, and just, I don't know, keep it from being about me, I think, in a
Hmm.
sense. So, yeah.
Yes. Um, what's your take on, and this is probably where we can end it,
Okay.
on the society in general and how we're responding to this? Some people pushing back against it, some people being maybe way too scared in the other direction.
Yeah.
Well, what's your impression as someone who has survived COVID-19 of our world and what we're doing?
First, I think it's understandable that people are tired of, they're tired of quarantine, they're tired of isolation, they're tired of staying at home, et cetera. And now the weather's getting warmer, and it's becoming even more difficult to do that. I think that what this has brought out, though, it's not difficult to see that as a race of people, we're selfish, and of course that's because of our wound, right? I mean, that's the fundamental wound that we suffered, is the thing that we fight against every day, is to submit ourselves to the grace of God, with his help, instead of indulging our own desires, particularly the destructive ones. But I think that the fundamental selfishness that this has brought out is this, and actually you mentioned this, Kevin, in an email you sent not that long ago. Our faith is built around sacrifice. It is, no greater love has any man than he would sacrifice his life for his friends. And what I'm beginning to see is, I'm beginning to see people say, it's been long enough, I deserve this, I'm just going to go ahead and do what I want, and to say, basically, to hell with everybody else.
Right.
And to me, that's the saddest thing. At the beginning of this, there was really more of a sense of, we're all in this together, do what you got to do for your neighbor, et cetera,
Yeah.
et cetera. And now I see that deteriorating pretty rapidly. And I see people starting to completely disregard the safety and well-being of other people and saying, well, look, if you get sick and die, I guess that's your fault,
Mm.
or your problem.
Mm-hmm.
All the good things that we see. My sister has been making masks for people. People are going to, like, I'm going to be donating plasma to see if my antibodies can help other people.
Oh, good,
People
good.
have been running contactless food markets. We're seeing a lot of really
Yes.
amazing and heroic actions. I mean, our medical professionals need to be just absolutely
Yeah.
praised for the
Right.
kind of sacrifices they've been making. But all of those sacrifices and everything that people have kind of devoted themselves to, I mean, the whole reason that I wanted to just stay in this room for as long as I possibly could and to limit, if at all possible, almost completely my contact with my parents, was because I knew that that's what was going to be best for them.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want them to have to deal with this. But what I'm seeing now is I'm seeing people starting to shed the whole solidarity sort of frame of mind and say, look, I've had enough of this. And that to me is the thing that I'm seeing now, is I think sort of the prevalent attitude. And what I think what my greatest concern is that that will prevail, and then we're going to have to do this all over again in a couple months,
Mm.
and that would be a real shame.
Right. Yes. Well, I agree with you, and I think those are some good insights. I think the other thing to keep in mind that might help people is the original fear was, if we didn't flatten the curve, the hospitals would be overwhelmed, as they were in Italy, and
Right.
people would be doing triage and people would be denied treatment. We've avoided that. So even if
We have,
we
yeah.
stick with this for a while longer or have another bout in the cold weather, I think
Hmm.
we need to keep in mind that the social distancing has worked,
It has worked.
has
That's
and
right.
has right. It has saved many lives, and it has
Hmm.
saved the first responders and the healthcare workers who are most at risk. So that's, I think, what people need to remember is this
Yeah.
isn't a waste. This is something that really
No,
is
it's
doing good.
not.
And the thing is, I mean, as I think I put in one of my other emails, St. Charles Borromeo closed the churches in
For
Milan
two
for
years.
two
That's right.
full
I
years.
mean, my
And
gosh.
yeah, so and back in 1918 here in St. Louis, churches and bars and restaurants were closed, and I think it was for about a 2-year period. And so we've been through this before,
We
not
have,
in
yeah.
our memories, but I mean,
No,
it's part of the human condition.
it is.
So, it takes, we'll do what it takes. But anything else, Dave, that you would want to add?
I will say one other thing. Early on in this whole pandemic, people started using the term unprecedented.
Mm,
And what to be sure, every time you deal with something like this, there are going to be aspects of it that there are no precedents for. But people started to use the term in the sense that this has never happened before. And I think that something that's good to keep in mind is, in a certain sense, this is not at all unprecedented. As you said, this sort of default position of the human family, um, we've dealt with it before, and we'll deal with it again, really, when it comes down to
right.
it. And the thing to remember is that there are the two sides of it, and you kind of pointed this out. There's the natural side where we have to use the common sense that we've been given to make good decisions for the benefit not only of ourselves but of our neighbors. Um, that's the first thing I mean, that is our immediate reality, and to disregard that is, I think, really, in a sense, it's for us to disregard the gospel. Um, and love your neighbor as yourself is what the Lord told us, and then He demonstrated that, obviously. Secondly, is we also have to remember that this isn't it. I don't remember exactly what it was, but in one of your emails you sent, you talked about how it's not the shape of things. We don't see the whole shape of things yet, and to me that was a great way of expressing that there's a hope beyond this. And I think that's one of the things that people who we have the ability to interact with, that's one of the things that they need to hear and see demonstrated from us, is that our hope actually surpasses just getting through this pandemic. um, and that's the thing, we do have a hope. We do have a hope.
Yes. even though sometimes we forget that, but we do.
Sometimes we do.
Oh, this was a lot of fun. Oh,
I enjoyed it too.
The other thing that's happening is it's automatically adjusting to light. I hate it when the camera does that.
I know, me too. Like auto exposure is one of my worst nightmares. Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, now I'm probably going to put this on YouTube. Normally, it's only available to my subscribers on Patreon, but I think we talked about some interesting things. So this will go on YouTube as well. For those of you on YouTube, you can go to my Patreon, which is patreon.com/grunky, Grunky, or go to grunky.com and pull down the videos, and you can find Socrates Meets Jesus online, where David plays the professor in the play that I wrote based on the book by Peter Kraft, and I play Socrates. We get a lot of comments about that. I think it has quite a few views. And so I get comments on that probably once a week. Somebody will comment on that video.
Really?
Yeah. So you'll see Dave's performance in that and mine as well. And there's more on grunky.com and my Patreon page and all that. Well, thanks, David Treadway, actor/bank worker. / social critic at this point.
That's right. There you go. Yeah.
So thanks a lot for this, and
thanks for having me on, Kevin. This was fantastic. Do I get a mug or something?
Well, I would be happy to mug for you, but that's just me making faces at the camera.
Here's the thing: I've seen you do that before.
I have seen you do that quite a bit. All right, we have. By the way, we have. I don't think I can get to them, but we have like 35 Theater of the Word mugs on this shelf above me.
Are you serious?
Yeah. So yeah, if you want a mug, you got a mug.
I got a mug. Okay.
And there's one for your mom. There's one for your dad. We should start giving them out as premiums for my Patreon subscribers.
I think that's a great idea.
That's a great idea. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, Dave. And let me just figure out how do you stop this thing? Oh, here, pause, stop recording.
There it is.